It's 11:45. You've been waiting all morning for this hearing. Before that, you've been waiting weeks, thinking of what you'll say and how excited you are to see your family. You've spent months on your best behavior, attending every program, keeping your head down, doing everything they've asked. You're just trying to make it home before Christmas. And now, it all comes down to this. You straighten out your clothes, walk in, and parole denied. But how could this be? You heard last week your old cellmate was judged by the same guy and he hasn't been on his best behavior like you have. God, what is wrong with that judge? He doesn't know anything about me. I just wanted to see my family for Christmas. You mutter under your breath as you realize just how hungry you are. Man, I need to eat something before I sob. But at least that would be justified. But maybe the judge's decision has nothing to do with you. Hello, my name is Brook, and welcome to the Cognitive Courtroom, the podcast where we examine how moral the forensic system actually is and analyze how cognition affects court. Today, we'll be primarily focusing on the hungry judge effect. Then we'll look at the other psychological effects that impact how decisions are made in court. If our opening story left you upset, stay with me. While those are valid feelings, there's also more humanity to be found here than expected. Objection? You forgot to introduce me. Right. This is Lynn, the other piece of the podcast. She's defiant to my ideas most of the time. Brooke's just jealous that my cross-examination skills are so sharp. I'm the actual logical voice around here. Sure, jealous. Lynn, do you actually need something, or can I get back to my narrating job? I needed to be introduced, and your podcast needs a reasonable voice. But go on. So why does hunger, something as simple as lunch, change whether someone walks free? A 2011 academic journal article entitled Extraneous Factors in Judicial Decisions explains exactly why. After examining 1,000 parole decisions across 10 months made by 8 judges in the Israeli system. Hold up. One country? Not even America? How do you know this is relevant to your all-American listening base? Lynn, would you at least let me explain what they found first? It matters because humans are humans everywhere, not just Israel. What they found across these 1,000 parole hearings is that while decisions start at a favorability rate of about 65%, it drops until right before lunch, where it becomes nearly zero. This was the case across months, showing how consistent it is. And even more interesting, right after their lunch break, that favorability rate becomes 65% again, leading the authors to suspect that perhaps the reason is because blood glucose and decision fatigue are weighing on these judges. So you're telling me that if the most impartial people in the world just ate a sandwich, they'd be fine? Don't you think that sounds ridiculous, Brooke? Well, not necessarily. I mean, think about it. Snickers' ad campaign, "You're not you when you're hungry," resonates with people for a reason. Because hunger changes how we act. Orquin and Kurzban did a meta-analysis in 2016 on exactly that idea and found that when blood sugar is lower, people make more intuitive decisions rather than actually deliberating. And they also make safer decisions, which is 100% going to impact the justice system, as for a parole judge, that means not letting someone be free. Okay, but what about what Glockner found in 2023? That it has more to do with prioritizing the harder cases at the beginning of the sessions. Their simulations show that it's not just glucose levels. Right, but it is still humanity. There's a very clear picture of decision fatigue within that. When you prioritize the harder cases first, and then the easier ones, your brain is tired from all those difficult cases. I mean, you're a defense attorney, Lynn. On days when you go to court, isn't it harder to write an email at the end of the day than on one where you rested? Besides, while Glockner is right to some degree, even they admit in their discussion portion that not all of it is because of their suspected reasons. And in some of these simulations, it is really just the human aspect of being hungry, tired, and in need of a break. The point is that even our most impartial people, whose entire job it is to judge fairly, are still human like the rest of us. They're still impacted by their brain's hunger system and decision fatigue like we all are. When they put on a robe and hold a gavel, their subconscious psychology doesn't stop functioning. This does, unfortunately, mean decisions like the story I read at the top of our podcast. Even worse, though, the hungry judge effect is not the only psychological effect that impacts our psychology. The halo effect also impacts the courtroom. In psychology, this means that one single positive trait, like attractiveness, confidence, or charm, spills over and influences completely unrelated judgments. If someone looks trustworthy, then they're treated as trustworthy. Britannica defines it as an error in reasoning in which an impression formed from a single trait or characteristic is allowed to influence multiple judgments or ratings of unrelated factors. So essentially, one thing changes how you see the whole. Think about when you have a new crush and you imagine them as this great person. Aren't you disillusioned when something tells you they're not? That's because your attraction is causing the halo effect. In the courtroom, this can cause problems for the defendant. Kramer et al. In 2023 found that for people convicted of murder, attractiveness can actually get them a lighter sentence. But this changes for sexual assault, as attractiveness leads to a heavier sentence. So you're suggesting people are vain? That they only care about appearances? No, Lynn, I'm suggesting subconsciously people view others differently because of their appearances. This isn't a new idea. Jarvie and Jeffers brought this up back in 1988. There's a reason defendants are told to cover tattoos, get a haircut, and dress nicely for court. It's because for both the judge and the jury, it does make a difference. But it's beyond the things in your control. In 1991, Zebrowitz and McDonald found that how baby-faced you are makes a difference in how much you had to pay or got paid in small claims court. That baby face translates directly to being seen as less responsible and naive, and then translates to more money. Your data is old. How do we know the halo effect is still relevant now, and that social norms haven't changed it? Well, Lynn, I was pointing out some of the older major cases to set the scene for how long the halo effect has been relevant. It's replicable. There is more recent data, though. Like in 2017, Johnson and King found once again that attractiveness makes a difference even after controlling for other variables. However, the halo effect doesn't just apply to the defendant who couldn't afford a blazer. It applies to the attorney, too. The Journal of Law and Courts reports in 2024 that attorney attractiveness does make a difference. Waterbury's data set of over 1,000 cases found that how attractive the attorney was played a beneficial role in success in the U.S. federal court system, meaning that attractiveness is something that judges and juries pay attention to. How do you know it's attractiveness and not another variable? Because most attorneys wear suits and have been trained to be competent, adept speakers. Attractiveness is something that differs across this group. This again reminds us of how human the whole system is. We think we can judge impartially, but our subconscious walks into the courtroom with us. Appearances and confident speaking do shape our decisions, whether we like to acknowledge that fact or not. That's simply how the halo effect works, how people work. To not acknowledge it, though, and to pretend we're above seeing that, is to risk committing the halo effect. And bringing it to light is the best way to diffuse it. The last psychological effect I want to talk about in the courtroom is anchoring. Harvard Law School describes it as this. The anchoring effect is a cognitive bias that describes the common human tendency to rely too heavily on the first piece of information offered, the anchor, when making decisions. I'll give you an example. When I was in my high school sociology class, I learned about a high-profile criminal case that had been recently going on at the time. A year later, I was called to jury selection for it. I walked into the courtroom already believing that this man murdered his children. I didn't see a tired face. I saw soulless eyes. I saw a monster. Anchoring didn't shape my impression. It wrote the story before I had even heard the judge tell us welcome. I didn't know you were called for such a big case. Did you get the juror's seat? No. I told them that if they put me on this trial, I'd take out my hearing aids, refuse to listen to any of it, and give him the max sentence. You did what? The point is, Lynn, I recognized my anchoring bias. I told the court that because I knew I was an unfit juror, that I was not moral, and I had bias about this particular man. But the anchoring effect goes far beyond me, or even juries. The Journal of Legal and Criminal Psychology in 2021 found that anchoring has a major impact on how long someone is sentenced to. Temis in 2020 explains that this is usually done by the prosecution arguing for overly high sentences to anchor that number, such as 20 years, while the defense does the opposite to anchor a lower number, like 5, which doesn't usually lead the judge to finding a fair middle ground, but actually choosing one of those anchors, once again demonstrating the cognitive biases that can be found in a courtroom. Judges and juries are not separate from their minds and their subconscious. They're human, affected by their brain just as much as I was blinded by my anchor about that killer. I still think he did it, but at least I'm aware that those thoughts are exactly what makes me unable to be a good juror. Those judges giving out sentences because of anchor points are not aware of it. So what now? We just accept every part of this system is biased and what exactly? Give up? The whole justice system sucks? I'm a lawyer. What do you want me to do? Well, no, Lynn. There are things that could be implemented to make a better system. Part of forensic psychology's purpose is to identify bias so we can work to change it. Work to make a better courtroom. So you're saying our judges should be able to eat while they sentence you to life in prison? That seems very professional. Well, I'm not saying that exactly, but I do think more breaks could be a good idea. Hemrani and Halbert Jr. found in 2024 that decision fatigue played a major role in whether or not infractions like your speeding ticket get dismissed, and that this effect is amplified in lower courts. So judges who work with the public a lot, they suggest, should be taking more breaks to help prevent this cognitive shift. Breaks don't slow justice, they preserve it. Though breaks and justice shouldn't be combined at the same time. So no, you shouldn't be eating a sandwich while giving a sentence. Those are two separate periods. Okay, but what about the halo effect? We hide everyone behind a wall? Or do we force them to listen to a presentation they'll ignore while they're being paid $10 a day? Well, in a perfect world, Lynn, we probably would blind everything. But that's not how courtrooms were built to function. And Nisbet and Wilson, the researchers who originally identified the halo effect, would tell you that people don't even realize how biased they are. And pointing it out doesn't change anything either. So no, a slideshow telling people that finding others in the courtroom attractive shouldn't influence their opinion probably wouldn't do anything. Wow, you're making me feel real hopeful here, Brook. There are things we can try to do, like encouraging defendants to dress nicely. But what really helps is addressing the anchoring effect along with the halo effect. There is a reason in many cases there are certain facts the prosecution cannot bring up, because they don't want the jury to anchor to them. Right, because if we knew that a man went to prison for selling drugs the last 3 times, it's not like the 4th time is the charm. He probably did it again. Exactly, Lynn. People, including you, are biased, and order matters. You don't start with a mugshot, just like you don't start by telling the jury that he volunteers with the Humane Society senior dogs every week. Both of these can become an anchor or something for the halo effect to project off of. The best method is to give neutral case facts before the defendant is ever around to make a judgment off of. But eventually they're going to introduce something that becomes an anchor, right? Isn't that unavoidable? Well, yeah, it is unavoidable. We're humans, we have biases, but sequential evidence, where the order is controlled, does help make for a neutral first impression with the least amount of bias possible. The halo effect and anchoring are simply shortcuts for the brain to help process easier. It's not that our brains are trying to be unjust. They just have a lot to process. Forensic psychology tries to recognize that and build a system that addresses it rather than dismisses it. Justice may be blind, but our brains are not. And that sensory input means we need processing shortcuts like the halo effect to get through our days. But it doesn't mean we need that for court. It sounds like we're doomed, since we're all biased, and then some of those biased people get to judge us. Lovely. Whoa. Lynn, the system isn't final. It's changing. There's room for more breaks to be implemented. Rules are changing to increase sequential evidence. Programs exist to make sure defendants have nicer clothes to prevent the halo effect. We're never going to get rid of bias entirely, but we can design around it. Think of it as the blueberries in a fruit salad. You might not be able to take them all out of the bowl, but you can work to ensure that not every bite you take has them. Really? You're comparing the justice system to blueberries now? My point is, Lynn, that cognitive bias is natural and human. Historically, it has been a way for our brains to not have to spend so much time processing. However, now it's something we have to keep in mind as we reform our justice system. So, yes, your parole being denied was unfair. But don't blame yourself. Blame a system that's still trying to understand the mind and change with this new information. Bias exists, but at the end of the day, we're all just as human as the judges who pass off decisions. So after looking at decision fatigue, the halo effect, and anchoring, what does all this mean for the idea of a cognitive courtroom? Well, it means the courtroom isn't separate from its humanity. A system that believes it's above bias becomes dangerous. The kind of place who has a judge that would sentence you just because he's hungry isn't a moral one. A system that recognizes bias becomes fixable. The courtroom isn't perfectly moral. It's human. And with that, I've been Brook and Lynn of the Cognitive Courtroom. Tune in next week where we explore if AI can do a better job avoiding these biases than humans. And please, make sure to like and share the Cognitive Courtroom with all your friends. And good luck on all your finals. Thank you.